The howl came from inside the tower. Behind the one door in my husband's keep I had sworn, on our wedding contract, never to open. I stood in the moonlit courtyard in my riding cloak, hours after I was supposed to be safely away at the herb wife's cottage, and listened to a sound no hound had ever made. It rolled down through the stones and through my ribs and settled somewhere behind my heart, and every sensible bone in my body said run. I crossed the courtyard instead. The tower stairs were ruinous in the dark. I caught myself twice against the cold wall, heart slamming, and at the top, the forbidden door stood shut, oak and iron, older than the keep around it. Torchlight guttered through the arrow slit. Something on the other side was breathing, something enormous. I could feel it through the wood, under my palm, slow and vast as a tide. My fingers found the latch. "My lady," a voice cracked across the courtyard below like a whip. "You gave your word." Chapter 1. The Price of a Daughter. The harvest accounts were still wet on my fingers when I heard my own price. I was carrying my father's ledger past my uncle's study. The ledger was mine in everything but name. It had been mine through 6 years of my father's illness. Mine when the grain merchants came to cheat us and left having somehow paid us. Mine every quarter day while my uncle took the credit and the wine. And through the study door came my uncle's voice, saying my name in the same breath as the words debt and settled. I stopped. I pressed my ear to the door. A lady is not supposed to do that. A lady is also not supposed to be sold, so I considered us even. "Lord Alistair will forgive the whole sum," my uncle was saying in the voice of a man who has found gold in his boot. The girl, the contract, done by winter. He was most particular that it be this winter. Lord Aldrich Alistair. I had met him twice. He was 50 if he was a day. He had eyes like unpaid bills, and his last wife had died of what the physicians called a fever, and what his own servants, when deep in their cups at the fair, called the stairs. At my feet, Sir Bramble growled at the study door. My dog is a small, scruffy, deeply unimpressive animal. I knighted him myself when we were both 8, which tells you what sort of court we keep, with the courage of a wet biscuit and the self-regard of an emperor. But he growls at the right doors. "Hush," I whispered, and picked him up, because my hands needed something to do that was not opening that study door and saying something that would cost me my teeth. Then I walked away fast, down the long corridor, eyes burning, arithmetic running wild. The debt, the mortgaged East Fields, what Alistair forgives he owns, what Alistair owns he breaks. And at the corner I slammed, at full furious speed, into a stranger. He caught me by the elbows, travel-stained, gray at the temples, road mud to his knees, and he held me steady and looked at me the way a horse trader looks at teeth, quick, thorough, not unkind. I watched him take the whole inventory, the ink stains, the ledger clutched to my chest, the small dog under my arm attempting menace at him and achieving a sneeze. "Forgive me," the stranger said. "I've come with an offer for the lady of this house." His eyes went to the ledger, then back to my face, and something in them sharpened. I begin to suspect I have just run into her. "The lady of the house," I said, "is currently being sold by the pound in that study. You'll want to join the bidding before the price moves." I should not have said it. He laughed, one short, surprised bark, and bowed. "Master Corvin, steward of Ravenmere, and I intend, my lady, to ruin the current bidder's evening entirely. Might you point me to your uncle? I'll want an audience tonight. My lord's instructions do not allow for waiting." I pointed. He went, and I, having learned everything I know from keyholes, was back at the study door before his knock finished echoing, Bramble tucked under my arm with his ears up like a co-conspirator. This offer was better. Suspiciously better. Lord Dante of Ravenmere, a name I knew only as a shape on the northern maps, black pine and cold fells, and a lord nobody visited. Asked no dowry, offered a settlement that made my uncle's voice go soft and reverent, and required the marriage done within a fortnight. Corvin laid it out like a man dealing winning cards, and then, so smoothly it nearly slid past me like a fish under ice, he laid down the last one. "One condition, and on this the contract stands or falls. The lady will keep from her lord's presence on the night of each full moon. She will never seek the old tower. She will ask no questions on either point. That is the whole of it." Silence from my uncle, a heartbeat no more of a man briefly weighing his niece against a sum of money. "Agreed," said my uncle. At the keyhole I mouthed why at the door. Madness was my first thought, a lord who raved at the moon, and a household trained to hide it. A mistress was my second. Some woman kept in the tower like a dumpling in a napkin, and a wife required to look away. My third thought was the one that mattered, and it arrived cold and clear as the water in the well. At least it is not Alistair. Every wife of my acquaintance was asked to overlook something. My mother overlooked a mistress for 20 years. I was being asked to overlook a Tuesday. Standing in that drafty corridor with my ear to the door of my own cell, I decided I was getting the better bargain, and that whatever waited in Ravenmere's tower, it could not be worse than what waited at the bottom of Lord Alistair's stairs. The term said a fortnight. Corvin's instructions, it turned out, said faster. First light, horses already ordered, papers signed by candlelight that same night. My uncle signed with a flourish. I was not asked to sign anything. I stood in the frost-blue courtyard at dawn with one trunk, one dog, and one demand, and I delivered it to Master Corvin in the tone of a woman listing dowry terms. The dog comes or I don't. Corvin looked down at Sir Bramble. Sir Bramble looked up at Corvin and attempted to seem valuable, and something moved behind the steward's face that I could not read at all. Not annoyance, nothing like annoyance. His mouth pressed flat the way a man's does when he is fighting down the urge to smile at a joke only he can hear. "The dog," said Master Corvin gravely, "comes." He handed me up into the carriage himself. The gates of Harrowfield closed behind me on everything I had ever kept alive, and the road north began. Chapter 2. The One Rule. 5 days of road, and this is what I pried out of Master Corvin. Nothing. The man deflected questions the way castle walls deflect weather. "Is my lord mad?" "He is particular, my lady." "Is he cruel?" "He is generous to a fault, and no doubt you'll go looking for the fault. I'd expect nothing less." "What is in the tower?" "Stairs, my lady, in shocking condition." I tried sideways attacks. I tried silence, which breaks most men inside an hour. I tried admiring his loyalty and asking how long he'd served the family, and got a courteous "all my life and my father before me, and not 1 inch more." Meanwhile, the country changed around the carriage. Tidy hedgerows giving way to black pine, fields to cold fells. The villages growing smaller and quieter, and in the last of them I watched an old woman touch the iron nail on her doorpost when Corvin named our destination to the ostler. He paid for everything, I noticed, in old copper. Not once in 5 days of inns and tolls did I see silver cross his palm. Sir Bramble slept the whole road like the useless knight he is, belly up on the seat cushions, paws twitching at rabbits. Then, on a road like any other stretch of road, he woke. He put his nose to the gap in the carriage window. He took one long, deep breath of the pine-dark air, and every hair on his small body stood up, and he went rigid as a fire iron, and by the time the trees opened and torchlight showed on wet black stone ahead, my dog was attempting, with total commitment, to dig through the carriage floor to freedom. Which is why I met my future husband in a courtyard, at dusk, wrestling a shrieking animal. Lord Dante of Ravenmere stood at the foot of his own steps to receive us, and my first thought, fighting a hysterical dog into stillness against my shoulder, was that no one had warned me, and someone really should have warned me. He was tall and dark and composed the way frozen rivers are composed, and handsome in a way that felt like an accusation. He watched me climb down in perfect glacial courtesy, and I got 2 steps toward him before Sir Bramble took one look at the Lord of the Keep, flipped out of my arms onto his back like a capsized beetle, and piddled on the flagstones in front of the entire assembled household. The silence had texture. Somewhere behind me, a stable boy made a sound like a kettle and was cuffed. I wanted the earth to open, but I was watching my new lord's face when it happened. I was watching for madness, for cruelty, for anything the keyhole hadn't told me, and what crossed that frozen composure was not offense. It was a flicker of grim, private satisfaction, gone as fast as it came, like a man thinking, at last. Someone here has the proper attitude. All around the courtyard, Ravenmere's own great hounds were straining at their handlers' grips to get to him, tails thrashing, whining with adoration. Every dog in that keep loved him. Mine was hiding behind my skirts, shaking. "My lady," his voice matched the rest of him, low, level, a door closed and bolted. "You were told my condition. I will hear from you that you understand it. Tonight, before anything further is signed at this end. Corvin, see the lady in." He turned and went up the steps, and the hounds cried after him. So that night I sat at the far end of a great hall from my future husband, at a lord's table laid. My ledger I ran over at once and caught, entirely in pewter and iron. Not one gleam of silver plate in the whole hall. a holding this size, and not a candlestick, not a salt cellar. I put it on the shelf in my mind beside Corvin's copper, and I ate, and when the servers withdrew, Lord Dante delivered his one rule to my face, flat as a closed book. Never seek him on the night of the full moon. Never open the old tower. Ask no questions on either point, of him or of anyone. In every other matter, the keep, the household, the lands, my life, I would find him, he said, reasonable to a fault. I am constitutionally incapable of leaving a closed book alone. I understand the terms, my lord, I said. One practical matter. If the keep catches fire on a full moon, do I knock first? For half a heartbeat, something cracked across that frozen face. The ghost of a laugh. I saw it, strangled at birth and buried in a scrape of chair legs as he stood, fast, said, "Corvin will see to the arrangements," and walked out of his own hall, mid-sentence, fleeing from a joke. I sat alone at the long table with my heart going oddly quick, thinking, madmen do not almost laugh, and cruel men do not run from a woman being impertinent. Whatever my new lord was, my two theories had just each taken an arrow, and I had nothing yet to replace them. Sleep was out of the question after that. I wandered, a new house must be learned, and it will not be learned lying down, and followed lamplight and the smell of bread down to the kitchens, where an old woman was drawing a late loaf from the oven, as though she had been expecting me. "There she is," said the old woman, and looked me over the way you'd look over a melon at market. "Sit, eat. You're too sharp in the face, the road does that." Her name was Marin. Old Marin, the household said it as one word, and she had been Ravenmere's nurse, his lordship's and his lordship's father's before him. She fed me bread and honey and appraised me between slices, and somewhere between the first and the second, I felt myself being, quietly and without ceremony, adopted. I fished, of course. I fished with the delicacy of a woman who has learned everything at keyholes. "The tower rule," I said. "Is it new? A grief, perhaps, since his father died?" Marin's hands never paused on the bread knife. His father kept the same rule. And his father's father. "The moon's an old landlord here, child. It collects on time, and we don't discuss the rent." Then, before I could get a hook into any of that, Priest's horse was seen on the ridge road this evening. "He'll be at the gates by morning, so you'll be wed by morning. Eat your bread. Brides faint, and it's always the clever ones." The priest was at the gates by morning. I was wed by morning. It was a contract, not a courtship. A cold little chapel, few witnesses, vows exchanged like terms of surrender on both sides, and Sir Bramble under my arm growling at the groom straight through the blessing while the priest gamely pretended deafness. I spoke my parts clearly. My husband spoke his the same way, looking at a point slightly above my head, and then came the binding, when the priest wraps the cloth and the two hands must join, and Lord Dante of Ravenmere took my hand in his. His hand was shaking. Barely. A tremor deep under the skin like a struck bell long after the sound is gone. I felt it against my palm the whole length of the blessing, and I stood in that cold chapel staring at our joined hands, understanding nothing. This man was afraid of nothing. Rooms rearranged themselves around him. His own hounds worshipped him, and his household moved to his glance, and he was trembling to touch me. The priest tied the cloth. The thing was done. My husband withdrew his hand, bowed over mine with perfect courtesy, and was gone about the business of the estate before the chapel candles were snuffed, and I stood there in my traveling dress, a wife of 1 hour, turning that tremor over and over in my mind like a coin I could not price. I had married a locked door with beautiful eyes, and the first key I had was this. Whatever he was hiding, it was not hidden from me. It was hiding from something else, and touching me had frightened it. Chapter 3, The Siege of Silences. That tremor carried me straight from the chapel to the breakfast table, because a question like that does not let a woman sleep in. My first married breakfast, my husband at one end of the long table, me at the other, and between our chairs, seated with the gravity of a chaperone hired by the church, my dog. I spent the meal watching my lord's hands, steady now, infuriatingly steady, lifting the pewter cup, breaking the bread, while beside me Sir Bramble, having apparently drawn some private conclusion about the household order overnight, stood on his hind legs and stole a rasher of bacon directly off Lord Dante's plate. Not my plate, his. The full length of the table ignored, my husband's breakfast rated specifically, deliberately. while my husband watched it happen with the expression of a man being taxed by a small hostile kingdom and lodging no appeal. "He takes liberties," I said. "I'd stop him, but I'm told you're generous to a fault." "I begin to see," said my husband to his violated plate. "Which fault?" That was the whole of our conversation. He rose, bowed, and went out to his lands, and I went hunting for the only person in the keep who fed me answers with my bread. I found Marin in the linen room and opened with a pewter. "A lord's table," I said, "and not one piece of silver plate in the hall, not a candlestick. I've inventoried poorer houses that kept at least a christening spoon." "Silver tarnishes," said Marin, folding, "and I've enough to polish." Which was a masterpiece of an answer, true, useless, and delivered while she pulled a stack of ledgers from the shelf beside the linens and pushed the whole tower of them into my arms. "If you must dig, child, dig where it wants doing. The household books. Nobody's had the keeping of them since his blessed mother died, and it shows in the pantry." I recognized the maneuver. I was being managed, aimed away from one thing and at another, the way you throw a stick for a dog. But she had misjudged her stick because those books were the true door into any house, and I fell on them like a starving woman. Oh, the state of them. 15 years of a steward's careful hand keeping the figures honest, and no lady's hand making them sing. Accounts that balanced and told you nothing, stores bought high, rents drifting, and 2 curiosities sitting in the columns like stones in bread. The first, Ravenmere paid no silver tax to the crown. None. Every holding in the kingdom rendered the king's silver at Michaelmas, Ravenmere's entry year on year, read only exempt by ancient grant. No sum, no reason. A hole in the ledger shaped exactly like a question I'd been told not to ask. The second curiosity was a tithe dispute with the mill villages. 2 years festering, a snarl of grain shares and water rights that any competent hand could have settled in an afternoon. Except that the entries showed why it hadn't been. Audience days came, and the Lord was hunting. Again, and again. One audience day in 3, his chair sat empty and his people went home unheard. I carried the books to Corvin, put my finger on the mill entries, and asked when the next audience day fell. "Tomorrow, my lady." A pause, delicate as a held breath. "His lordship hunts tomorrow." "Then his lordship's chair will not sit empty," I said. "Send word to the mills." Which is how, the very next noon, the millers of 2 villages arrived to find no lord in the great chair but the new lady instead, ledger open, ink ready. They looked at each other. They looked at me. One of them, the elder, a man built like his own millstone, asked with heavy courtesy whether they oughtn't wait upon his lordship's return. "You've waited 2 years upon his lordship's return," I said. "Sit down, Master Miller, and let's see if I can't cheat you faster than that." It was the mill dispute that did it. Not charm, never charm. Competence is the only charm that keeps. I had settled grain shares since I was 16. I walked them through the water rights, split the tithe along the old markstones, took a little from each side's pride and none from either's purse, and had them shaking hands by the time the light moved off the hall floor. And it was as the millers were bowing out, satisfied and slightly dazed, that I looked up and saw my husband standing in the doorway of his own hall. Returned early. Mud on his boots, weather in his hair, and on his face watching me sit his chair and rule his hall, an expression I had no entry for in any ledger I kept, something wide open and unguarded, there and then gone, shut away as fast as the almost laugh had been. He crossed the hall to me. The household held its breath, so I found, did I? "You have my thanks, my lady," said my husband, stiffly, formally. 4 words delivered like a man reading his own execution order, and then he bowed and left, and I sat in the great chair with my ink drying, more furious than I have ever been at 4 polite words in my life. "My thanks, my lady." I had untangled 2 years of his mess in an afternoon, and been thanked the way you thank a tolerable soup. I stewed on it through the accounts. I stewed on it while I dressed for supper. And at supper, the 2 of us and the long table and the chaperone dog between, I took my revenge the only way I take it. Precisely. I needled him about the pantry stores, bought high for a decade. I needled him about the rents, drifting like unmoored boats. I observed that the wry histories I liked to read were full of lords who mistook silence for gravity, and offered to lend him a volume, as the case studies were instructive. He parried in monosyllables, and I pressed, and finally, reaching, I'll admit, for the sharpest thing in my drawer, I set down my cup and said, "You needn't perform indifference so thoroughly, my lord. I was warned you were unpleasant before I ever agreed to come. You're only confirming the brochure." and Lord Dante of Ravenmere laughed. Out loud. Once, a short, cracked, entirely involuntary sound, like a door opening in a house where every door has been nailed shut for years. A serving man nearly dropped the tureen. In the doorway, old Marin stopped dead with the bread in her hands and stared at her lord as though the sun had risen at midnight. My husband looked horrified at himself. I looked, I imagine, insufferable. And Sir Bramble, alarmed out of a doze by a sound he had never heard this man make, exploded into furious barking at my husband, 6 pounds of outrage defending me from the threat of laughter. Before my lord's face could finish darkening at the little beast, I scooped my dog into my lap, kissed his scruffy head, and delivered the pardon. Don't mind him, my lord, he's sensitive. Over the top of my dog's head, my husband looked at me. At the dog, at me, at the dog, and something in his jaw surrendered to something else. He inclined his head half an inch to me or to the dog, I genuinely could not say. And in my lap, warm and vindicated and pardoned by the highest court in the keep, Sir Bramble stopped barking, licked his nose, and gazed across the table at the Lord of Ravenmere with a long, thoughtful, measuring look. The look of a small general who has just watched the enemy's cannon fail to fire and is quietly redrawing all his maps. Lorien. Something changed in my husband after the night of the laugh, and I could not name it, so naturally I set about
Chapter 4. Dante. There is a law older than the kingdom, older than the crown's roads, old as the blood in my veins. Animals submit, hounds grovel, horses steady under my hand when they would bolt from any other. It has been so for every man of my line since the first moon, and I have never in my life had cause to think on it, any more than a man thinks on his own shadow. Her dog knows what I am. He knew it from the gates. I watched it strike him through the carriage window, the scent of me, and I confess that his display on the flagstones gave me a moment's ugly comfort on a hard day. At last, the proper attitude. He is of the old kin, that ridiculous animal. Some thread of it, thinned across God knows how many generations of village mongrels. Too weak to be anything but a nose and a memory, but the blood remembers. He fears me as he should fear me. And tonight, after supper, after she laughed me into laughing, after I fled my own table for the second time since she came, because the alternative was to sit there and let her see what her voice does behind my ribs, I came down to the one refuge this keep affords me. The great chair by the hearth, my father's chair and his father's. No man, hound, nor steward has presumed upon it in 15 years. The dog was in it, curled like a smug bread roll in the exact centre of the cushion, and when I stepped forward he lifted his head and looked at me, and here is what no man of my line has ever had to record. He was terrified. I could scent the fear coming off him like heat off a stone, every ancient instinct in his small body screaming at him to grovel. He did not move, because behind me my wife had followed me down with her book and her wine, and had settled into the window seat with the bright, dangerous interest of a woman hoping the evening might yet produce entertainment, and the creature had done the arithmetic. I watched him do it. The big one does nothing while she watches. Her protection is absolute. He held my gaze, shaking faintly. One small act of insolence balanced on the whole weight of her affection, and he won. Because what was I to do? Explain. Explain to my wife of 4 days why the Lord of Ravenmere required his chair surrendered by 6 pounds of dog, in a voice the dog would understand, and she must never. I sat in the lesser chair. The dog's tail thumped once against my cushion. Noted, it said. She read her book. I read nothing holding a book. And the campaign that began that night ran on in the days after like a war fought entirely in territory I could not defend, the warm spot by the fire taken. The place at her feet, garrisoned. My plate raided, only mine, never hers, with the leisurely insolence of a tax collector, and every single time, adjudicated by the one judge in the keep whose rulings I would not appeal. He's the size of a loaf of bread, my lord. What can he possibly have done to you? What has he done? What has he done? I could not tell her I was losing a war of dominance to a footstool. I could not tell her why it wounded, why I stood in my own doorway of an evening watching that creature sleep against her ribs while I, her husband, bid her good night at her chamber door like a tradesman delivering coal. I had promised myself this marriage would be paper, a shield against the spring, and nothing more. I had sworn it on the tower stairs the day Corvin rode south. She was to be a name on a contract. Then the name sat my chair and settled my miller's. Then the name asked whether to knock if the keep was burning, and I laughed for the first time in. I have stopped counting. Then I found myself, riding the far fences in the rain, storing up things to tell her, hoarding them like a boy. And I noticed the shape of her affections, because a starving man notices bread. She needles what she loves. The dog taught me that. The dog gets the sharp tongue and the soft hands both, insult and embrace in the same breath. And lately, since the miller's, since the laugh, the sharp tongue has been turning on me, and every jab lands somewhere that has begun, appallingly, to look forward to it. I began, God help me, to envy the dog.
Lorien. Something changed in my husband after the night of the laugh, and I could not name it, so naturally I set about investigating it. Evidence the first, he had stopped fleeing. Suppers now ran their full length. My needling met not with monosyllables, but with a dry, buried, startling wit that emerged like a badger, rarely, blinking, and dangerous when cornered. Evidence the second appeared on my chair in the solar, where I found, one morning, a book. No note, no occasion. A volume of the wry histories, the very ones I had threatened to lend him across the supper table, invoked once, in passing, as a weapon, bound in worn calf and clearly read half to pieces by someone in this house long before me. He had not sent a servant to buy me a gift. He had heard one sentence, gone into his own shelves, and left me the book he loved. Cold men do not listen. I sat down where I stood and read it in one sitting, bramble a warm weight on my feet, and the light moved across the floor. And somewhere past noon I looked up from a chapter and out the window and noticed, without meaning to, the pale ghost of the moon standing in the daylight sky. Thin, appearing. Newish, my mind supplied, and filed it, and went back to the page. I finished before supper and went at once to return it, because the book wanted discussing, and pretexts are how all the best things begin. And the hunt for my husband led me through the yards, past the smithy to the stable court, where I stopped in the shadow of the arch and did not announce myself. Lord Dante of Ravenmere was kneeling in the straw. The kitchen boy stood beside him, tear-streaked and hiccuping, and in my husband's two enormous hands lay the boy's puppy, leg bent wrong, taken under a cartwheel by the sound of the boy's broken explaining. And my husband was splinting the little leg with strips of harness leather, slowly, so gently, talking the whole time in a voice I had never heard him use. Low, warm, endless small nonsense. There now, brave lad, worst is over, hold the hurt still, and it stops shouting. The puppy trembled and licked his wrist. Around the court every stable hound had gathered in a loose worshipful circle, lying with their heads on their paws, drinking him in. Every hound in the keep adoring him. And my own dog, pressed suddenly hard against my ankle, having followed me, watching the same scene from the shadows with me, shivering. Every dog loved him. Mine alone was afraid. The two facts sat side by side in my ledger mind, and would not reconcile, and standing in that archway with his book against my chest, watching the coldest man in the north murmur a puppy through its pain, I felt something in my own chest quietly rearrange itself and decline to be put back. I withdrew unseen. I returned the book at supper instead, across the table, with my review attached. He had opinions, it turned out. He had heated opinions about the third volume. And we argued the histories through the meat and into the cheese, and it was somewhere in the middle of that argument, leaning in to dismantle my point about the Treaty of the Fords, that my husband said, "You've misread him entirely, Lorien. Not my lady. My name." First time, dropped mid-sentence, unnoticed by the speaker the way a man doesn't notice stepping from ice to solid ground. I noticed so thoroughly that I lost the thread of my own argument, and had to concede the Treaty of the Fords, which still rankles. Between our chairs, Sir Bramble lifted his head, assessed the new temperature at the table, and graciously permitted it. And past my husband's shoulder, through the tall window, the moon stood over the pines, and it was not a paring anymore. It was gibbous, swollen, a coin gone soft at one edge, and as I registered it, I registered something else. My husband, animated a moment ago, following my glance to the window and then not looking at it. Turning his shoulder to the glass with the studied, deliberate discipline of a man not looking at a debt collector standing in his doorway. The talk died. And into the new quiet, as if he had been waiting in the passage for exactly this silence, came Master Corvin, who bowed and addressed the space between us. "Begging pardon, my lord. My lady, the herb wife in the low valley, expects you at week's end for the women's stores, the winter tinctures. It's the custom of the house. I'll have your escort and your things ready. You'll bide there the night." I had asked for no herb wife. I had heard of no such custom. And my husband, who had defended the honor of a treaty 3 minutes before with his whole heart, studied the grain of the table and said nothing at all. Chapter 5. The Howl. My husband came down to see me off, which he need not have done, and said goodbye as formally as he had married me, which by now I knew was its own kind of tell. Formality was where he went when something in him was straining at the door. He handed me up into the saddle himself, and there it was, palm to palm through my glove, the tremor. The wedding day tremor, deep under the skin, the struck bell shiver. On the morning of the day, my mind observed with terrible clarity, whose night would bring the full moon. I rode out of the gates, adding sums. Item: a hand that trembles at the binding, and again at the full moon's eve, and at no time in between. Item: no silver in the house, no silver in the steward's purse, no silver tax rendered to the crown, exempt by ancient grant. Item: a rule his father kept, and his father's father, the moon an old landlord collecting on time. Item: a tower I must never open. Item: a lord who will not look at a gibbous moon. Item: every hound alive adores him. And my dog, who loves all the world and fears nothing in it but thunder and geese, has been afraid of him since the gates. I rode the whole valley road totaling that column, and I hated every answer the arithmetic offered, because none of them were mistress and none of them were madness, and the ones that remained had no names I was willing to write. The herb wife's cottage sat low and warm in the valley, all bunches of drying green and a fire like a hug, and the herb wife herself was kind, comfortable, and one thread too talkative. She fed me, showed me the tinctures I was allegedly there to learn, and settling me by the fire with a posset, said the sentence that broke my last safe theory. "You'll have the good bed, my lady. I keep it aired for this night's custom. Kept it for the ladies of Ravenmere since his lordship's mother's time I have, and my own mother kept it for the lady before her, God rest them both." Ladies, plural, generations of them. His mother sent to this fire 1 night a month. Her mother-in-law before her, same fire, same night, back beyond living memory. Every woman who married into that house sent out of it, over and over, forever, while the moon collected its rent. No mistress in the history of the world has lasted 3 generations. Whatever was in that tower had been in that tower since before my husband was born. The herb wife's snores began early. I lay in the good bed staring at the rafters with my column of sums burning behind my eyes, and the moon came up through the little window, huge and white and shameless, and lay across my blanket like a summons. And I want it recorded that I did try. I counted the rafters. I recited the rents. I lasted the better part of an hour. Then I rose, dressed, saddled my horse in the herb wife's lean-to as quietly as a thief, lifted my traitorously willing dog into the saddlebag, where he curled and shivered the entire ride like a bad conscience with fur, and rode back up the valley under a moon so vast and close it felt like being watched by God. The keep was wrong. I felt it from the tree line. No torch on the gatehouse. The gates themselves unbarred, but the great doors of the hall and I crossed the empty courtyard leading my horse were barred from within, and so was the kitchen wing, and so was every door I tried, the whole household sealed inside like a town expecting plague. Every window dark, except one torch guttering in its bracket at the base of the old tower, and then the howl. It came from inside the tower, through the stones, out of them, and it was no hound's voice and no wolf's voice that any hunter has ever described to me. It was vast and it was grieving, a sound with a hole in the middle of it, and it rolled across the empty courtyard and through my ribs and settled behind my heart. My horse screamed and tore the reins from my hand and was gone through the open gates. In the saddlebag at my feet where I'd set it down, Sir Bramble had gone silent and small. Every sensible bone in my body said run. I crossed the courtyard. You knew I would. The tower stairs were ruinous in the dark. Rotten treads, a missing rail. I caught myself twice against the freezing wall and swore at my absent husband for the state of them, which steadied me better than courage. And at the top the forbidden door stood shut, oak and old iron, and torchlight guttered through the arrow slit, and on the other side of the wood something enormous was breathing. I could feel it under my palm when I laid my hand flat against the door, slow, vast, a tide with lungs. My fingers found the latch. "My lady!" Corvin's voice cracked up the stairwell like a whip, raw with a fear I had never heard in him. Starefoot with a lantern, gray-faced, and he did not climb toward me. He would not, I realized. He stood at the bottom as if the stairs themselves were forbidden him, and above and behind me through the oak the vast breathing had stopped. Whatever was in the tower was listening. "Corvin," I said, and my voice came out strange and small in the stone dark. "What is behind this door?" "Come down," he said. "Please, my lady, please." And because he said please, Corvin, who deflected like castle walls, begging, and because the silence behind the oak had a shape to it, and a tension, a held breath the size of the room, I did something I had no reason on earth to do. I turned back to the door, laid my palm against it one last time, and spoke through the wood. "Dante?" The silence changed. I cannot tell you how I knew, only that I knew, the way you know a room has someone in it before you see them, on the other side of that door. Something enormous had gone perfectly, tremblingly still at the sound of its name. And then there came, soft, unmistakable, terrible, the sound of a great weight settling against the base of the door. Against my side of it, as close to me as the oak allowed. I went down the stairs on legs I could not feel. Corvin marched me to my rooms without one word, set 2 men on my door, and left me to the longest night of my life, pacing the floor while my dog watched from the bed with dark, unreadable eyes, my theories boiling over one by one. A captive, a cursed brother, a beast the family was bound to keep, a debt to something older than the crown, a witch's punishment. Each theory I built, the settling weight against the door dismantled. Captives do not come toward the voice of the lady of the house. Monsters do not lie down at their names. Gray dawn found me at my window, hollow-eyed, and I was still there when the tower door opened below, and my husband walked out of it. On his own 2 feet, gray-faced, hollowed, moving like a man wrung out and hung to dry, his shirt open at the throat and his feet bare on the frost. But whole and alone. And him. No captive followed. No beast. He stopped in the middle of the empty courtyard and stood a moment in the cold light like a man surfacing from deep water, and then he lifted his head and looked directly up at my window, as though he had known the whole time exactly where I was. I did not step back. We looked at each other across the cold morning air, my husband and I, and every theory I had left died between us, and the question that stood up in their place was not the question I had carried up those stairs. It was new, and it frightened me more than the howl had, because the howl had only been strange, and this was mine. Not, what is he hiding from me? What is that tower doing to him? Chapter 6. Winter. He did not come down that day, and I did not go up. But a keep is a small country, and its lord and lady cannot avoid each other past sundown, and at supper he appeared, moving carefully like a man made of cracked crockery, and we ate in a silence that was not our old siege silence at all. This one was full. He knew I had been at the door. I knew he knew. Corvin would have told him, the weight against the oak had told me. And when the servers withdrew, I watched my husband gather himself to say something, an accounting, a rebuke, terms, and I discovered I could not bear to hear any of it. So I got there first, and I did not ask about the tower. I gave him something of mine instead. I told him about my father. I had told no one, ever. It is not a story, it is just years. But I told him the 6 years of sickness, the estate that would have gone under, the ledgers that became mine at 16 because someone's they had to be. The grain merchants I learned to skin politely. My uncle at the quarter days, taking the credit and the wine, and my father too ill to know whose hand kept his roof, and the particular loneliness of being trusted with everything except the truth of how bad things were, of running a house that would not admit it was being run. So you'll understand, I finished, to the fire, because his face was too much to look at while saying this, why your one rule sat so ill with me. It was never the moon, my lord. I have been the person a house depends on and lies to. I know that arrangement from the inside. I had hoped never to hold the post again. The fire cracked. Beside my chair, Bramble sighed in his sleep, and my husband, who volunteered nothing ever, said quietly, My father kept the rule from my mother for 9 years. I turned. He was looking at the fire, too. 9 years of sending her to that cottage in the dark. 9 years of her theories. She had theories, you'd have liked her. And she found the truth in the end anyway, as the clever ones always do, from a direction he never guarded. And she forgave him the truth in an afternoon. His jaw moved. The 9 years she was still forgiving when she died. Not the what, Lorien. Never the what, the how long. It was the closest he had ever come to the door of himself, and I understood I was being told something with a promise buried in it that he could not yet say aloud. I did not push. We sat with the fire falling in on itself, and somewhere in that long quiet, his hand and mine ended up on the same armrest between our chairs, not quite touching, then touching, my smallest finger against the side of his hand turning a fraction toward mine, neither of us withdrawing, neither of us breathing, the whole room balanced on a knuckle. And 6 pounds of dog landed on the armrest. Sir Bramble inserted himself into the gap between our hands with the weary sigh of a professional recalled to duty on his evening off, settled his chin and looked from my face to my husband's with an expression of profound moral disappointment. The laugh got both of us at once. Mine first, his half a beat behind, freer than the supper table crack, a real laugh, and at the sound of it the dog's ears went back in alarm, which made it worse. And when we had finished, the room was easy in a way it had never been, and my husband looked at me across the small tyrant between us and said, "Your fence arithmetic is wrong, by the way. From the histories argument, the Treaty of the Fords, you conceded too soon, and I've been ashamed for you ever since. My arithmetic is never wrong. Your arithmetic is faultless. Your fences are imaginary. You've never walked a northern boundary in your life, you price fence law like a southerner, all timber and no stone." He rose, and there was something in his face I had not seen before. Something almost like mischief, badger rare. "Ride the bounds with me tomorrow and argue it on the ground, or concede the point forever." I was in the saddle before he'd finished his breakfast. We argued fence law for 11 miles. I want that entered in full, 11 miles of frost-hard boundary track, hill and stone-walled fell, and we disputed every rod of it. The cost of dry stone against post and rail, the shepherd's easements, the ford rights, a wall his grandfather had set 4 feet over the markstone that I identified from the map in my head, and he defended with escalating shamelessness because it was indefensible and he knew it. He knew every stone. I knew every figure. Somewhere past the 6th mile, I realized he had stopped arguing to win and started arguing to keep me talking, and somewhere past the 8th, I realized I had done the same, and when my mare stumbled at the ford crossing his arm came across me so fast. Rain caught, my elbow gripped, my whole weight held for a heartbeat against the winter air, that the argument died in my mouth. "Stone," he said, releasing me with great care, looking hard at the far bank, "beats timber," was my point. "Your grandfather's wall is still 4 feet over the markstone." "My grandfather," said my husband, "was a visionary," and I laughed so hard the rooks went up off the fell, and he watched me laugh with his heart undisguised in his face for 1 entire second before he remembered to put it away. Snow began as we turned for home, the first true snow, fat and silent, and we came down through it into the courtyard to find it full of strange horses. A banner I half knew hung wet by the gate, some cousin lord of the southern marches, one of those men who ride the winter circuit of other people's hospitality. He rose from my husband's hall fire as we came in. He had installed himself already, boots to the flames, and made his courtesies, and I watched him measure the keep, the plate, the lady, all of it, with quick little valuing eyes. His name does not matter. What he was, I learned at dinner. It came over the fish, smooth as grease, a remark about how the North must be thin indeed in choices, for Ravenmere's lord to have gone digging brides out of, a pause, a smile. Harrowfield, was it? That little mortgaged place? Though of course a hall this size wanted a housekeeper more than a lady, and he'd heard I was marvelous with figures, in the tone in which one praises a merchant's clever daughter. The old cold I knew from my uncle's table rose in me, and I had my answer loaded. I have dined dangerous men before, but I never fired it, because the temperature of the hall dropped first. My husband set down his knife. He did not raise his voice. I doubt he raised his pulse. He observed into the new silence that his guest appeared confused as to his whereabouts, and would want correcting before he embarrassed himself further, that the Lady of Ravenmere had, in one season, resolved what 2 years of stewardship could not, that her figures, since the man admired them, currently kept the roof over the very fire he was warming his boots at, and that the road south, while snowy, remained, and here my husband looked at him with the flat, grey patience of the fells themselves, passable. The cousin lord left before the cheese. Bramble escorted his boots to the door, 6 pounds of triumphant cavalry snapping at the heels of the retreat, and for once nobody called him off. And it was the next morning, the insult evidently having worked in my husband overnight like a splinter, that I came down to find at my place at the table, sitting on top of the household books, a ledger. New, bound in green leather, calf soft, my initials, my new initials, blocked small in gold in the corner. The finest book of accounts I have ever held. Someone had ridden to the market town and back in the snow for it. There was no note, because of course there was no note. But the man himself was still in the doorway, caught escaping his own gift, one boot already in the passage. "You keep this house in borrowed books," he said to the doorframe, gruff as a January hinge. "Since you insist on ruling it, you may as well do it in decent paper. The binding is stitched, not glued. It will lie flat. The stationer assures me that matters." "It matters," I said. My voice came out unsteady, which surprised me. "It matters enormously, thank you, Dante." His name. First time, out loud, deliberate, no my lord to hide behind. And I watched it land on him the way his had landed on me over the Treaty of the Fords, a man stepping from ice onto solid ground and finding it holds. "Well," said my husband, Lord of the North, terror of visiting cousin lords, and fled his own hall for the 3rd time since I'd known him. I sat down with my green ledger and my ridiculous smile, and the first entry I made in it, at the top of the first cream-smooth page in my best hand, was "Debts outstanding. One apology owed to the lady re the condition of the tower stairs. Interest accruing." I was still admiring it when Corvin brought the letter. A courier had come through the snow behind our departed guest, riding hard, the seal already famous in my stomach before my eyes confirmed it. Alistair's seal. My husband opened it at the hearth and read it twice, and I watched winter come back into his face line by line, and when he passed it to me without a word, I understood the passing itself was a promise kept. No more houses that lie to the person they depend on. The letter congratulated Lord Dante of Ravenmere on his marriage, every word courteous, every sentence a knife laid flat. Lord Alistair rejoiced to learn that so hasty a match had been contracted, having himself been in negotiation for the same lady's hand. When Ravenmere's gold outbid him, he trusted the union was all it appeared, since some questions were being asked among the old families as to how much it appeared, and he looked forward. This was the close, and reading it I heard the cell door in it without yet knowing the shape of the cell, to seeing the happy couple's bond proven at the spring gathering, as was his right, by his blood, under the old law. "Dante," I said, "what gathering? Proven how? And what old law can a man like Alistair possibly share with you?" My husband stood looking into the fire, and the firelight moved on his face, and I watched him come all the way up to the edge of the whole truth. I could see it, the actual weight of it, straining against 9 years of his father's mistake, and not get across. "After the moon," he said at last, very low. "It's ill luck what you're asking, this close to the full." "That's not evasion, Lorien. It's the only superstition my family keeps, and we keep it with reason. When the moon's paid, I'll answer everything you ask. Everything, my word on it." The moon. I looked past him to the window, and the moon looked back, swollen near ripe over the pines, a night from full. The cloak would be packed by morning, the cottage fire would be lit. The good bed aired, as it had been aired for the ladies of Ravenmere since his mother's time. We stayed by the fire too late that night, both of us, neither willing to end it. The wine went down, the unsaid piled up soft as the snow outside, and when I finally rose to go up, he rose with me, and we stood too close in the small light, and my husband lifted his hand and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, slowly, the way you'd reach toward a bird, and his hand did not tremble at all, and I stopped breathing, and the whole winter leaned in. Barking. Explosive, hysterical, 6-pound barking, at the window, at the sky, at the swollen moon riding up over the pines, and the moment shattered like a dropped cup, and I watched every light in my husband's face bank down to embers and discipline, as he looked where the dog was looking. "Corvin will see you to the cottage after breakfast," he said, and bowed over my hand, and was gone up the dark stairs. I informed Sir Bramble that he was the worst knight in the history of chivalry. He accepted this with equanimity and went to sleep on my bed. And in the morning the cloak was packed and the escort saddled, and the whole arrangement stood ready in the courtyard under a sky like a held breath. And then the sky let go. Snow came down as though it had been stored up all winter for this one morning, blind and total, a white roar, and within the hour Ravenmere had no roads at all. The cottage might as well have been on the moon, and the moon was coming here. Chapter 7. The Night the Door Broke. I had never seen Master Corvin frightened. That snow-bound morning I watched him age a year an hour. He and my husband held a council of two in the doorway of the hall, low and fast, while the snow erased the world, and whatever plans they built and discarded, the one they landed on was brought to me by my husband himself, and it was simple. The far wing. Merrin and I, the two doors between us and the main keep barred from our side. From dark until full daylight, no matter what. No matter what I hear, I said. Say the rest of it. No matter what you hear. He took me by the shoulders, the first time he had ever done it, and even then, even braced as he was, I felt how carefully those hands landed, as though I were the breakable thing in the keep. He stood closer than he had ever stood. There was gold I saw in the gray of his eyes, a thin ring of it right around the dark. You'll hear things tonight, Lorien. The snow changes the sound of the keep. Everything will seem nearer than it is. It cannot reach you. It has never once, hear me, never once in the whole history of this house reached anyone. The tower holds, the tower has always held. I need your word. You have it, I said, and you have my terms when the moon is paid. Everything, you swore it. Everything, he said. Built stone by stone from the start, until there is nothing in this house you don't hold the accounts of. My word on it. And then, because we were us, the dog stays with you. If it comes to it, he can defend you from the linens. The far wing, when the dark came down, was an island. Merrin barred the doors with her own hands, tested each bar twice, and settled by our small fire with her knitting and a carving knife on the table beside the wool. Laid there without comment, the way you'd lay out spectacles. I could not sit. I stood at the window watching the snow, and through the snow the moon rose. You could not see it, but you could see where it was. A smear of cold light climbing behind the white, and somewhere in the main keep, muffled by the storm and the stone, something began. Not the howl. Worse, a rhythm, a great slow pacing back and forth and back floors away, that I felt in my feet more than heard. Merrin's needles never paused. Knit, she said. Or pace, if you're a pacer, but do it away from the window, there's a draft. And so we passed into the night, an old woman knitting and a young one pacing, both of us pretending, while the thing we were pretending about walked its cage at the top of the keep. The shouting started at the outer wall, not from the tower, from the courtyard, from the gatehouse, men's voices raw in the snow silence, and then the unmistakable bloom of torchlight where no torch should be, out by the granary. Merrin was at the window shutter before me, and her face, when she turned, was the color of the storm. Men over the wall, she said, on this night, and I heard what she did not say because I was already hearing the whole shape of it, raiders, in a blind blizzard, on the one night of the month when the Lord of Ravenmere could not come to his own walls. That was not chance. Somebody had counted the moons. What I did next, I did because I am my father's daughter and my own woman, and because 6 years of running a house had built the habit too deep to bar in, I unbarred the door. Merrin's knife hand caught my sleeve. Your word. My word was the tower, I said. That's the granary. The children sleep over the bakehouse, Merrin, and every man we have is running the wrong way in the dark. Someone has to stand at the stairhead and sort them. I stood at the stairhead of the far wing in my nightgown and sorted them. I am told I was heard over the storm, which I believe because I was using the voice I keep for grain merchants. Buckets to the granary line, the bakehouse children down to the cellars with the scullery girls, Merrin anchoring the cellar door with her knife and her knitting both. The household steadied the way a house steadies when someone visibly holds the middle of it. We were winning, or at least not losing. Then the window at the end of my own corridor came in with a crash of glass and freezing air, and a man climbed through it. He was snow-caked and quick, a short blade low in his hand, and his eyes found me at the stairhead and narrowed with recognition. He knew me. He had come up that wall looking for the lady, and every candle's worth of general in me blew out at once and left a woman alone in a nightgown at the wrong end of a long corridor. I ran. Bramble ran with me, a streak of outrage at my heels. Behind me, boots on broken glass, unhurried, ahead. The night stairs I never used, down and down, a door I'd never opened at the bottom. I burst through it into blinding snow and knew before my eyes cleared that I had chosen wrong. The little dead-end court below the old tower. 3 walls of sheer stone, snow to my shins, the storm-smeared moon directly overhead, and the man in the doorway behind me, breathing easy, blocking the only way back. He said something, the terms of my abduction, I think, the reassurances such men make, but I have lost the words, because everything after arrives in pieces. Sir Bramble, planting all 6 of his pounds between me and the knife, hackles up, roaring his tea-kettle roar. The man laughing at him. My own voice, I heard it as though it were someone else's, cracking upward off the stones of the tower, no plan in it, no thought, just the last coin I had, spent on the only name in the keep that had ever made the darkness stop and listen. Dante! And high above us,
Dante. The man goes under at moonrise. That is the bargain and the whole of it. The names go, the words go. The architecture of being a person is unbuilt beam by beam, and what remains paces the stones until dawn buys it all back. 20 years I have given my nights to that room, so the thing that remains could never touch what the man loves. My father before me, his before him. The tower holds. The tower has always held. But the wolf keeps what the man buries. I had not known that. 9 years of my father's mistakes, and he never taught me the one thing that mattered, because he never let himself learn it. The wolf is not the man's opposite. The wolf is the man's cellar. Everything carried down the stairs and locked away comes to the wolf in the end, and all that winter, every ledger-sharp laugh through the floorboards, every argument over imaginary fences, every evening of her voice, the man had been carrying her down the stairs and telling himself it was paper. It was a shield. It was nothing that needed a name. The wolf had been in the cellar the whole time, receiving. So when her cry came up through the storm, her voice, her fear, hers, the wolf did not have to learn anything. It already knew. It had known since a trembling hand in a cold chapel. And the door, which has held every moon for 20 years against rage and hunger and the empty pacing dark, met something that night it had never once been tested against. And I am not ashamed of what I have to record next, which is that oak and iron turned out to be provisions against fury. And there are no provisions against that. The court below, in pieces, snow, torch smear, the man with the knife between me and her. He was dealt with the way weather deals with candles, alive. The wall took him harder than I did. He was through the far drift and gone toward the tree line, making sounds I will not transcribe. And then there was nothing between us at all, and that was the true test, the one my whole line built the tower to never take, the wolf, loose, under the full moon. And her. She was pressed to the stone, white as the snow on it, and I could smell her terror, and the man in the cellar of me was screaming, "Go, get away from her. You are the nightmare, you are the 9 years, go." The wolf did not go. The wolf, who is not clever, who cannot argue fence law, who knows perhaps 5 things. The wolf lowered its head all the way to the snow, the way the strong show the throat to the precious, and waited to be told what it was.
Lorien, the thing that came off that tower and down the sheer of the wall, down the wall, stone to stone, like night pouring, was enormous, black shading to silver, wrong for the world in a way that bypassed my mind and spoke straight to my spine. It went through the man with the knife like hard weather, and then it turned, in the ringing silence, and the moon came off the snow from every side, and I saw it whole, taller at the shoulder than my collarbone, breath smoking, the storm settling on its black shoulders and not melting. I should have fainted. I have never been the fainting sort, and I have never regretted it more, because it looked at me, and it had my husband's eyes, gray, ringed with gold, a thin band of it right around the dark. The eyes from the doorway of the hall, the eyes over the histories, the eyes an inch from mine while the whole winter leaned in. The beast out of Ravenmere's tower stood in the wreck of the snow with my husband looking out of its skull, and while I watched, those eyes did the thing I will never in my life forget. They went from battle to terror. It saw me seeing it, and this creature that had just unmade an armed man began, slowly, horribly, ashamed, to back away from me toward the dark. "Dante," I said. It stopped as though the name were a wall. "Dante." My voice was wreckage, but it was mine. "You promised me everything, stone by stone, starting now, I think." And the great head came down. all the way down, lower than my hands, throat bared to a woman in a soaked nightgown, and it crossed the snow to me slow as a penitent and pressed its nose gently into my shaking open palm, and stood there, trembling exactly the way a hand had trembled in a cold chapel at a wedding, waiting to be told what it was. "There you are," I said idiotically, and burst into tears, and buried both fists in the black ruff of the monster I was married to, and the monster made a sound like a hearth settling, and leaned its tremendous weight very carefully against me. At my feet, Sir Bramble sat down in the snow with the profound relief of a small soldier watching artillery arrive, looked up at the two of us, and sneezed. Torches, then, voices, the household coming around the granary with the raid broken, and the wolf pulled back from me, one long look, and was gone up the wall and into the tower dark the way night goes when the lamps come. I stood in the ruined court with my heart slamming and snow in my collar, and when the first torch found me I heard myself lie before I knew I had decided to. The raider came over the roof, I said. The storm took the tower door clean off its hinges, I said. No, I never saw where the man fled. The lady of the house in her nightgown in the snow, guarding her husband's broken door with her chin up, and not one soul questioned her. I climbed those ruinous stairs one more time before dawn, past the splinters, and left, on the floor of the empty landing where the oak used to hang, folded, my warmest blanket. It was gone by morning. Chapter 8. Everything, stone by stone. I did not wait to be summoned, and I did not give him room to avoid me. When the tower doorway showed movement in the gray of morning, I was already on the stairs with the largest breakfast tray in Ravenmere's history and my green ledger under my arm. He was human, sitting against the wall of that bare stone room amid the wreckage of his own oak, my blanket around his shoulders, gray-faced and hollowed to the bone, and when he saw me in the doorway his whole body braced, and I watched him arrange his face for an ending. For horror, for flight, for the priest and the annulment. He had rehearsed this scene, I could see it. He had been rehearsing it his whole life, and in every rehearsal the wife runs. I stepped over the splinters, set the tray down in front of him, sat on the fallen door itself, and opened my ledger to the marked page. "I have questions," I said. "I've made a list. It's numbered. Eat while I read it, my lord. You look like the dog's breakfast, and I would know. I've watched what he does to yours all winter." My husband looked at the tray, at the list, at me, sitting on his broken door in the morning, cold with my ink and my numbered questions, not running. And he put his face in his hands and made a sound that was half a laugh and half something that had been waiting 20 years behind a bolted door. And when he could speak, he said, "Stone by stone, then." And he kept his word. Everything. The old blood, the kindred, he called them, the way you'd say the family. Clans that carried the wolf in the blood since before the kingdom had a name or roads, their houses scattered through the wild border country, keeping the marches quiet, that no royal garrison could keep. One night in the month the man goes under and the wolf walks. The tower was his family's answer, generation upon generation, oak and iron, and one absolute rule, so that the wolf could never touch what the man loved. His grandfather built the door I was sitting on. It held every moon for 60 years, my husband said, and looked at me with something rueful and unhealed moving behind the gray. And then you screamed. Item by item, my list came apart in my hands into answers. The silver, poison to his kind, a burn like a brand, hence the pewter, hence Corvin's copper, hence, when I pressed, the hole in the tax rolls, an old unwritten bargain, crown and kindred, older than any charter. The border houses keep the marches, and the crown does not oblige them to handle the king's silver, and the crown does not ask why. Every reign renews it by never mentioning it. The herb wife, sworn to the house 3 generations deep, paid in land and trust, keeper of the cottage custom so that no lady of Ravenmere ever passed a moon night under the same roof as the tower. The hounds, they know me for the biggest wolf they'll ever meet, and dogs have always loved an honest hierarchy. And my dog, and here my husband's face did something complicated, is of the old kin, believe it or not. Thin to nearly nothing, generations of it, but the blood remembers. He knew me at the gates for exactly what I am. A pause. He is also, I want it noted, the single most insolent creature of either blood I have encountered in my life, and he trades on your protection like a moneylender, and he knows precisely what he is doing. He extorts you, I said with dawning joy. You're an apex predator, and my dog has been running a protection racket on your bacon since the wedding." "I would like it entered in the ledger," said the Lord of Ravenmere with dignity, "that I could not retaliate." I entered it. Then I set down the pen because we had come to the bottom of the list, to the entries written in the smallest hand. The trembling, chapel and moon's eve, and nowhere between. He was quiet a long moment. "The wolf knew you," he said at last, not quite meeting my eyes. "At the binding, the moment your hand touched mine. The man had a contract and a plan and a fortress of very sensible reasons, and the wolf had your hand, and it knew the way it knows north. It has one word, Lorien, one, and it filed you under it at the wedding, and I have spent an entire winter losing an argument with my own cellar." He breathed. "It trembled because it recognized you. I trembled because I understood what that was going to cost my sensible reasons." Which left the last entry, the letter by the fire, proven at the spring gathering by his blood under the old law. "The moot," said my husband, and told me the price of everything. The gathering of the kindred houses each spring, at the standing stones in the high border country, older than the crown's courts, and among the old blood above them. Pack law judged there since the first moon. And the first stone of pack law, a lord of the kindred holds his seat only while bonded. An unbonded lord's lands stand open to challenge by any house with blood standing. His father dead 2 winters, his time of grace ending this spring, and Lord Aldrich Alistair. "Alistair," I said. "Alistair is one of you?" Alistair's line carries a trace, thinned past shifting generations ago, but blood is blood under the old law. It buys him standing at the stones and nothing else, and he has spent his life hating both halves of that sentence. Alistair, whose hunger had always been for the borderlands, who had bid for me as a debt and been outbid, and who had lodged, before the letter was even sealed, a formal challenge to Ravenmere's seat, to be judged at the spring moot.
"So you needed a wife before spring,"
I said. My voice stayed level, which I was proud of. Any wife, a wife of record. "That was the plan the man made," he said. "Yes, I'll not dress it, you were to be paper, Lorien, and the plan survived until approximately your first breakfast." He looked at his hands. "But here's what the paper cannot do, and what I have to tell you though it ends me. A challenged bond is judged in one way only. The mate stands before the gathered houses and gives her word, freely, unforced, that the bond is true. And pack law requires the word be given in full knowledge. She must know what she is bonded to, all of it. No proxy speaks it, nothing written serves, and the kindred, the ghost of a bleak smile, can smell a lie the way you can smell smoke. That is why the rule. That is why the cottage. A wife who did not know was a shield that shattered the moment anyone tested it, and a wife who knew was my mother's 9 years, waiting to happen." The tower was very quiet. Below, faintly, the morning sounds of the household repairing itself. "And so I am telling you the last of it plainly," said my husband. "And then I am going to do the only honorable thing left in my reach. The moot falls at the next full moon but one. You now know everything a mate must know, and I am not asking you to stand at the stones. Do you hear me? You were bargained for at a keyhole like a sack of grain. I know about the keyhole, Corvin tells me everything, and I will not finish what Alistair started by chaining your one free word to my neck out of pity or duty or whatever this winter has confused you into feeling in a snowstorm. If the bond fails at the stones, Alistair takes the seat and the lands. Not you. There are provisions. You'd be kept whole, Harrowfield's debts covered. You would want for nothing." "Stop talking," I said. He stopped. I looked at this impossible man, hollow-eyed in a ruined tower, wrapped in my blanket, offering to hand his ancestral seat to the worst man of my acquaintance rather than lean 1 ounce of weight on me. And I felt the answer standing up in me with absolute clarity. And I did not give it to him. Because I have been disposed of at 2 keyholes by men who never asked me. And the next time my word was wanted, the one word, the free one, it was going to be asked for properly, out loud, by a man brave enough to want it. Not refused on my behalf by a self-sacrificing idiot with beautiful eyes and a blanket. "Eat your breakfast," I said, gathering my ledger. "All of it. And have someone see to a new door. The account of this house does not carry 2 structural holes." And I went down the ruinous stairs, past his baffled silence, to conduct the morning's second interrogation. They were both in the kitchen. Marin and Corvin, side by side at the long table like children caught in the jam, having plainly been up all night and having just as plainly heard where I'd taken my tray. I sat down across from them, opened the green ledger to a fresh page, and audited an entire winter of evasions, item by item, while Marin pushed bread at me and confessed with magnificent lack of repentance. The silver that tarnishes, the stick she'd thrown me with the household books, the herb wife, the Ridge Road priest, and the one-day wedding. Before you could think better of it, and before he could. All of it admitted, none of it regretted. And when I arrived at the charge of general conspiracy of silence, old Marin buttered her bread and looked me dead in the eye. "You were falling in love," she said. "The pair of you, and neither with the sense God gave a goose to see it. 9 years I watched his mother's marriage limp from that secret child. I wasn't going to let the secret kill this one before it started. So we held our tongues and let the winter work." She pointed the butter knife at me gently. "And here you sit with his tray gone up the tower at dawn, so I'll take no lectures on my methods." I had no lecture that would survive contact with that. I turned instead on Corvin, who had the grace to study the table, and put to him the question my morning's arithmetic had already circled twice. "The raiders counted our moons, Corvin. They came over that wall on the one night the Lord of Ravenmere could not come to it. Who has been counting our moons?" "That," said Master Corvin, "is the correct question, my lady." He laid his hands flat on the table, and the deflecting was over. I watched him retire it like a sword. "The man who fled left tracks a blind man could read, storm or no. 2 of our people rode the line at first light. The tracks run east." He paused. "Everything east of the ford, my lady, is Alistair." The kitchen was warm and smelled of bread, and the cold got into me anyway. "And understand what the stones will mean, child, since we're done sparing you," said Marin quietly. "If the bond fails at the moot, it's not lands alone. A bond judged false under pack law is void. The marriage with it, unwound like it never was. You'd be a spinster of 19 with a broken contract by midsummer." Her old eyes were steady on mine. "And the man who's been counting our moons has not stopped wanting what slipped him at your uncle's table. He's only changed weapons." Under the table, quietly, Sir Bramble climbed into my lap, turned around once, and settled, facing the east window. Chapter 9. The Vigil. Alistair came in person as the thaw opened the roads, which we had expected, because men like Alistair always come to gloat in advance and call it paying respects. What we had not expected was how good he would be at it. He arrived with a silk tongue, a modest escort, and a gift of southern wine, and across one long feast of knives he probed our marriage for the cracks his challenge needed. It was masterful, I'll grant him that from a professional standpoint, every thrust deniable, every insult wearing courtesy like a borrowed coat. He had heard, from a mutual acquaintance who'd enjoyed our hospitality in the first snow, so the sneering cousin lord had been his creature, and the whole insulting dinner and inspection, that my lord and lady kept separate wings. He had heard the lady was sent visiting each month in all weathers, touching such independence, and so new a bride. He asked me, eyes glittering over the wine, whether the North was not lonely for a woman of my, smile, accomplishments. He got nothing. I have been managing dangerous men across dinner tables since I was 16, and my husband, it transpired, could perform besotted with a conviction that frankly demanded questions, his hand finding mine on the table between courses, his eyes finding me down the length of every sentence, until somewhere past the fish I looked up into that performance and found no performance in it at all. Just my husband, looking at me, forgetting to pretend he was pretending. And I lost the thread of Alistair's next thrust entirely, because I was busy having the single most inconveniently timed realization of my life. Neither of us is acting. Neither of us has been acting for months. Alistair saw none of it. Alistair was watching for cracks, and there is no crack in the thing we were accidentally showing him. And under the table Sir Bramble conducted a silent campaign against his boots that I officially deplore and privately reward to this day. But at the threshold, taking his courteous leave, our guest bent over my hand and paid his true respects, softly, for me alone. "Whatever he is, my lady, and I think you and I both know by now it is a what. You were bought for it. Bargained at a keyhole, same as I'd have had you. The only difference is the depth of the purse. At the Stones they will make you swear it was no purchase with your one free word, before houses that can smell a lie on the wind." He smiled, and it reached nothing. "Do consider before spring what your word is worth. It would be a pity to spend it perjuring your soul for your purchaser, when you could keep it, walk away whole, and let the law simply correct the ledger. He meant it to poison me against my husband, and I stood in my own doorway watching his escort clatter out and felt the poison work exactly backward, because he was right about one thing, and being right about it in his mouth clarified everything. My word is worth a great deal. It is the one thing in my life that was never sold at any keyhole, which meant it was mine to spend. And riding away down the thaw-black road was the man who thought he taught me caution, when what he'd taught me was exactly what I wanted to buy with it. The moon that had watched his visit, I had started to feel it now, the way the whole keep felt it, a tide in the corner of every evening, fattened as the roads dried, and on its eve Corvin appeared at breakfast with the old logistics in his mouth and the traveling cloak over his arm. I handed it back. "Store it," I said, "and give me the key to the new tower door. I know you hold one, you hold everything." He went so still that Marin across the kitchen stopped kneading. "The stones will ask whether I know what I am bonded to, Corvin. All of it, you told me the law says. In full knowledge. Well, I have seen the wolf in a crisis, in the snow, in the worst hour of both our lives. That is not knowledge, that is an emergency. Tonight I'll keep the account properly, from the inside, start to finish. Or explain to your lord at the stones why his wife's testimony has a hole in it the size of a moon." I had prepared for a siege. I got instead a long look, very old and very tired, and, at the last, very like the look he'd worn in my uncle's courtyard when I made him take the dog. And then Master Corvin reached into his coat and laid the key on the table and said, "He will argue, my lady." He argued. Through supper, up the tower stairs, new oak, iron-strapped, twice the old door's weight, I made a note in the ledger that at least the stairs were still a scandal, and onto the bare landing itself while I set down my chair, my lamp, my blanket, my green ledger, and the first volume of the Rye Histories. He argued that no one of his line had ever passed the change observed. I replied that his line's record on Moon Knight policy was 9 years of his mother's grief and a broken door, and was due for new management. He argued the sight of it was not, his jaw worked, was not something he could bear to have live behind my eyes every time I looked at him after. That one I answered on my feet, close enough to feel the heat coming off him as the light outside went amber to gray. "What lives behind my eyes," I said, "is a monster coming off a wall in a snowstorm because I called your name," and lowering its head into my hand. "You've had my worst hour and your worst hour in the same courtyard already, Dante. It's done. There's nothing left to protect. There's only whether you spend tonight alone in a stone box, or with your wife, who brought a lamp, and a book you love, and who is not. Read my lips, my lord. Leaving." The last of the sun went out of the arrow slit. "Sit behind the chair line I chalked," said my husband hoarsely, pulling his shirt over his head. "The first quarter hour. After that, I should be certain of myself. Lorien," and the moonrise took whatever came next. It was not gentle, and I will not pretend it was, and I understood within the first minute why every man of his line would rather have died than be seen. It looks like drowning in reverse, and it goes on. And the sounds are the sounds a man makes when pride runs out. I stayed behind the chalk. I held the lamp steady with both hands, and I kept my voice level, and I kept talking. The rents, the histories, the scandalous fences of his visionary grandfather, an unbroken river of household nonsense, so that the last thing under and the first thing up would both be the sound of me. And then it was up, filling the lamplight, black shading to silver, breath like a forge, the terror of the old blood, turning in the small room to face me with the gold-ringed eyes, and I closed the ledger and moved the chalk-lined chair aside and sat down on the blanket by the lamp. "Well," I said. My voice held. I want that recorded, it held. "You are considerably larger than the dog. He has been grading himself on a shamefully generous curve." The wolf crossed the room, floorboards conceding under each step, circled once like all his lesser cousins, and lay down with a granary-settling groan, and laid his enormous head in my lap. So that was the night then, the first moon night in the whole recorded history of Ravenmere that any of them had ever passed accompanied. I read to the wolf from the Rye Histories by lamplight, one hand on the great warm skull, scratching an ear the size of both my palms, while the storm-colored eyes drowsed and the tail, I am entering this in the permanent record, thumped, at the good parts entirely without the owner's dignity being consulted. The moon crawled its arc past the arrow slit. The lamp burned low. Somewhere in the small hours, the new door, which I had on purpose left off the latch, nosed open, and Sir Bramble marched in. He had been sulking below since sundown at his exclusion. He now assessed the situation. His lady occupied, the lap annexed, the annexing party, the ancient terror of his bloodline, currently having its ears scratched, and I watched a small soul wrestle at the very summit of its courage. Then he squared his 6 pounds, trotted the length of the wolf like a man boarding a whale, and wedged himself with immense dignity into the last unclaimed territory on the premises, directly on top of the wolf's head, between the ears. The gold-ringed eyes rolled up. The wolf exhaled the long, oceanic sigh of a lord surveying his household's final order of precedence and locating himself conclusively third. "Don't look at me," I told him, turning the page. "You laughed at the brochure. You knew the terms." Dawn was worse than moonrise. The change back caught him like an undertow, and I dropped the book and held on through all of it, his head against my shoulder, until the shaking was a man's shaking and the breath was a man's breath, and the first word up out of the wreckage, cracked and human in his, before his own name had even come back to him, was Lorian. "Here," I said. "Right here. You're through." We sat in the cold gray light on the blanket, the lamp guttered out, my husband wrapped half in the blanket and half around me, his face in my hair. Both of us wrecked and neither of us moving, and it was there, on the bare boards of the room his family built to be alone in, that he finally asked me. Properly. Out loud. Not for the stones, not for the testimony, not for the wife of record. "Stay," he said. "Not for the seat, hear the whole of it. If the stones go against us, I will hand Alistair the keys and the lands and dig ditches in Harrowfield and be the richest ditch digger in the kingdom if you're there at the end of the row. I am not asking my shield. I am asking my wife. I love you. I have loved you, I think, since you asked whether to knock if the keep was burning. I am certain since the Millers, and the wolf has been certain since the chapel, and it is very tired of waiting for me to catch up. Stay, marry me, properly. The real one, the one where I ask first. Stay." And there it was at last, my one free word asked for out loud by a man brave enough to want it. I spent it exactly where I had decided to spend it the day Alistair taught me its price. "Yes," I said, "obviously. It's been yes since the fences. Now kiss me before the household wakes. No, I am not entering the delay in the ledger, Dante. The interest would ruin you." He kissed me. The dog disapproved. The dog was outvoted 2-1 for a very long time. Chapter 10. The Stones. The spring that carried us to the moot was the mirror of the autumn that had carried me north. The same long roads, everything inverted. Then I had ridden toward a stranger's one rule beside a steward who answered nothing. Now I rode beside my husband, who answered everything, because everything was precisely what the stones would require of me. That was the shape of the journey. The longest, strangest, sweetest conversation of my life, conducted at a walking pace through the greening border hills. The law of it was simple and merciless. My word would shield him only if I spoke in full knowledge, and the kindred can smell a lie, and a lie of omission has a scent like any other. So he emptied the whole house of himself for me, room by room, holding nothing back. The history of the houses and their old wars, the courtesies of the stones, who speaks and when and what silence means, every unlovely story of his line, a great-uncle who ran feral and had to be brought home by 3 houses together. The winter his grandfather's temper broke a treaty, his father's 9 years told whole this time, including his own boyhood spent listening at the wrong side of a tower door. He gave me the worst of his blood with the same steadiness he'd once given me the terms of a contract, and I took it the way I take all serious accounts, item by item, questions in the margins, nothing skipped. "You realize," I said, somewhere in the high hills, "that no bride in the history of marriage has ever known her husband this thoroughly. I could audit your soul." "You've had the keys to everything else since the Millers," said my husband. "The soul was the last room with a lock on it. We came over the last ridge at dusk. The moot ground opened below us out of the hills like something the hills had been keeping. A great ring of standing stones, older than the kingdom, fires already burning between them, and the banners of the gathered houses of the old blood stirring in the twilight wind. Wild northern colors I was learning to read, houses whose names were older than the crown's whole family tree. And nearest the ring, First banner we passed, planted early and prominent, the way a man plants a flag he's already counting as planted on one ground. Alistair's. I will spare you the full protocol of the stones. It consumed a night and a day, and it is beautiful, and it is interminable, and the wry histories will get a savage chapter out of it from me eventually. What matters came at moonrise on the second night, when the fires were built high and the houses ringed the stones, and the moot master, an ancient gray-eyed woman of the northernmost house, with a voice like a ledger closing, called the challenge of Alistair against Ravenmere to be judged. Alistair's advocate spoke it, but the work was Alistair's, and I sat beside my husband in the firelight and listened to the most dangerous account I have ever heard rendered. Dangerous because nearly every entry in it was true. A bride bargained for at a keyhole in a single evening, sight unseen. No dowry asked. Above market indeed paid for her, as one pays for goods wanted quickly. A wedding inside a day of her arrival, before the lady could so much as learn the house. A wife lodged in a far wing, dispatched to a cottage on the full of every moon. My whole strange backwards beloved courtship, narrated with perfect accuracy to 200 wolves. Every fact a stone in the wall of the false conclusion, a bond of paper. A shield hired against this very challenge, a fraud upon pack law itself, and then Alistair himself rose, silk-voiced in the firelight, to lay the capstone. And the final proof, houses, is mercy itself. The lady is innocent in this. Ask her, but gently, whether she so much as knows what her purchaser is. She was sold blind at a keyhole by one man, and bought blind by another. Void the paper, free the girl, and let the seat pass to blood that holds the old law honest. He sat down into a silence, with weight in it. 200 houses' worth of eyes came to me, and the moot master's grey gaze crossed the fire, and the ledger-closing voice said, "The law is one, and it is old. The bond stands on the mate's word alone, freely given in full knowledge here beneath the moon where no lie lives long. Then let the lady speak if she will." I stood up in the firelight before the gathered old blood, and I spoke. "My Lord Alistair's account is accurate," I said, "and I can improve it. He's left out the best parts." 200 wolves went very quiet. Beside me, I felt my husband stop breathing. I was not merely bargained at a keyhole. I listened at it to both my sales, ask him how he knows so much about the first one since he was the buyer. A ripple through the fires. The price was one condition: never seek my lord on the full moon, never open the old tower. I signed nothing, my uncle signed everything. I came north with one trunk and a dog, and Lord Alistair is quite right. I came blind. So let me give the houses a full accounting of what the blind woman found. And I gave it to them, item by item, in the plain hall voice I keep for grain merchants and millers. And I watched the ring lean in, because there is one thing the old blood loves better than law, and it is a tale. I found a lord so cold he fled his own hall rather than laugh at his wife's joke, and I found the laugh anyway. It took one supper. I found a table with no silver on it, a steward with no silver in his purse, a hole in the tax rolls shaped like a question, hounds that worshipped the master, and one small dog of thin old blood who would not stop trembling. And I did not understand my own household inventory for half a year. Houses, but I kept it, and it kept me honest. I found a man who heard me name a book once and left his own copy on my chair, who splinted a kitchen boy's puppy in the straw with hands the size of the puppy and thought no one saw, who took my part against an insult with the whole winter in his voice, and rode 11 miles of fence line letting me win the argument, and gave me a green ledger because I keep his house in, his words, decent paper. I looked at Alistair across the fire, and on the full of a winter moon, my lord, armed men came over our wall in a blizzard, men who had counted our moons and chosen the one night the Lord of Ravenmere keeps his tower. I was run to ground in a dead-end court in my nightgown by a man with a knife who knew my face, and I called my husband's name, and a door his grandfather built came off its hinges. The stones were silent. The fires stood straight up in the still air. "I know what my husband is," I said. "The law asks it plainly, so hear it plainly. I know to the marrow. I have watched the moon take him and give him back. I have sat the whole arc of a full moon on the floor of that tower with the wolf's head in my lap, reading him the histories, and it is a very fine head. Houses, the ears alone are the second best company in the keep. I came north a clause and a contract. Lord Alistair's account is true, and I am the proof it is worthless, because I stand here in full knowledge, holding nothing but the one word that was never sold at any keyhole, and I give it now. Freely, he is mine, and I am his, and I will go on choosing it every moon of my life. I spread my hands to the ring of stones, and if any house gathered here doubts my word, the wind is with me, come and smell it. What the kindred do instead of applause has no name in the crown's language. It began somewhere in the northern banners, one voice lifting, and it took the whole ring of stones like fire takes stubble. 200 houses of the old blood, heads back, howling assent at the risen moon until the stones themselves seemed to hum with it, and my husband stood up beside me in the firelight with his heart undisguised in his face for every wolf in the world to see and let them look. The moot master let the sound run its full course before her grey eyes turned, at last, to Alistair. And Alistair was already rising to salvage his retreat, courteous to the final rung. But Master Corvin was rising too. Before the challenge is entered as answered, said Corvin into the settling quiet, Ravenmere enters one further matter for judgment. He had ridden the whole way south with a flat leather case behind his saddle and deflected all my questions about it, the wall, and now I learned what stewards keep in their cases. Touching the armed men who crossed a kindred house's wall on the night of the full moon. An old offense, houses, with an old name. Ravenmere tracked the man who fled. Ravenmere found the man who fled. A beat. He proved very willing to discuss his wages. The moot may find his sworn account instructive, together with the reckoning of whose land the tracks crossed, whose ford they forded, and whose steward's hand signed the wage roll of the company he rode with. The grey-eyed moot-master read the pages by firelight, and the silence changed around Alistair like weather turning, and I watched a man standing die in a ring of stones without one voice raised. Sending armed men against a house on the moon, against a house bound in the tower, defenseless by its own law's discipline, has indeed a very old name, and the penalty attached is not death and not exile. Among the kindred it is worse and simpler. The moot-master spoke the sentence in the old tongue, and what it meant, Dante murmured to me as it fell, was struck from the blood. Alistair's thin trace, his standing, his right of challenge, his name in the reckoning of the houses, unwound, voided, as if the old law had never known him. The crown's courts would never touch him, they would never need to. The only nobility his hungry blood had ever truly craved admission to had simply, formally, forever, ceased to know he existed. He left the firelight between two houses that did not look at him, his banner already struck, and the darkness past the stones took him, and that is the last that this account, or any account of the old blood, will ever have to say of Lord Aldrich Alistair. The houses feasted us for 2 days. I was adopted by 3 separate grandmothers of the northern banners, acquired a standing invitation to audit the moot's own tithe rolls. A lady who'd say come and smell it to the ring of stones will not be cheated, and our reckoner is a scoundrel. And danced with my husband under the stones in the firelight, badly both of us, to music older than the kingdom. And then we rode home to Ravenmere through the full green spring, north over the ridge and down the pine roads, married, for the first time in every way any law of any blood could measure it, truly, freely, knowingly married. Epilogue, debts outstanding. Autumn stands gold on the fells outside the tower window, and I am winning an argument about stairs. They are finished, my husband says, from the doorway of what the household has learned to call the moon room, the old tower chamber, which has a proper hearth in it now, and rugs and the good lamp, and a new oak door hung on hinges I chose myself. Rebuilt to the last step, oak treads. Aureel, you have no further grievance. I have a ledger, I say, and hold it up, green leather going soft at the corners from a year of use, open to the page he knows is there. Debts outstanding, one apology, the condition of the tower stairs entered last winter, accruing interest. Rebuilding the stairs settles the stairs, my lord. It does not settle the apology. I nearly died on those stairs twice, I remind him, in the dark, in a nightgown, chasing a howl. He crosses the room. He moves quietly for a big man. I have stopped pretending I don't love it, and leans over the back of my chair, which was his chair, once, by the hearth downstairs, before I annexed it and had it carried up here, which the household managed with straight faces and Marin managed with none. Lady of Ravenmere, he says, against my hair, I am sorry about the stairs. Witnessed, says old Maren from the doorway, arriving with the supper tray and no apology for her timing whatsoever. Write it in your book, child, and let the man eat. Moon's up in an hour. The moon is up in an hour. That is simply a thing we say now, in this house, the way other houses say frost tonight. A fact of weather, planned around, prepared for, stripped of every ghost it used to carry. The herbwife's fire in the valley keeps its vigil for no one these days. I wrote to her myself, and she wrote back that after 3 generations of Ravenmere ladies she was owed the rest, and also that she was keeping the good bed made up regardless, as her ladyship has previous form for arriving at midnight. We eat by the new hearth, the 3 of us. I count the dog counts himself. And Dante tells me the moot's midwinter letters have come, including one addressed to me in the northern moot master's own hand. The tithe rolls, and the reckoner you called a scoundrel, who has resigned. And then the light through the window goes from gold to white, and my husband looks at me the way he looked at me across our wedding binding, except that his hands now are perfectly steady.
Stay,
he says. He asks every month. He will never need to ask again, and he will never stop asking. And both of those things are the point. I have a book to finish, I say, settling into the annexed chair with the Rye Histories, Volume 4. Someone in this room left me on a cliff's edge last moon and then turned into a wolf. The change is not gentle. It will never be gentle, and I no longer look away from any part of it. He asked me once in the gray of a dawn whether I minded, and I told him the truth, that a woman who keeps the accounts does not skip the costly pages. But it is over faster now, somehow, easier, as if the wolf no longer fights the door because the door is no longer locked. And then the room is full of him, black shading to silver, breath stirring the lamplight, and the great head comes to rest in my lap with a sigh that moves the hem of my skirts. I read aloud. The wolf listens. When I slow at the difficult passages, he turns his eyes up at me with an editor's impatience, and I tell him that criticism is easy and literature is hard, and read on. On the hearthstone, monumentally unimpressed by all of it, Sir Bramble sleeps his sleep of the unjustly rewarded, opening one eye at the page turns. And past midnight, when the fire is low and the histories have run out, I set the book down and work my fingers behind one enormous ear, and the terror of the old blood, lord of the northern fells, holder of his seat under the ring of stones, makes a sound in his chest like a hearth settling, and goes to sleep under my hand. The moon through the window is only light. In the morning I hold him through the change, and his first word, before his own name comes back to him. His first word is always, every month, the same. It is mine. The end. So tell me, would you have kept your word about that tower door, or opened it the first month? And whose side of the chair war were you on, the Wolf Lords, or the 6-pound Emperors? Tell me in the comments. If Lorien and Dante warmed your fire tonight, you know what to do, and there's always a place for you by this hearth next story.